Welcome to this edition of On Politics. I'm David Haynes. I'm the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. We're streaming live today on Facebook. I'll be joined today by Craig Gilbert in Washington, Tom Kircher of PolitiFact Wisconsin, and Dan Bice and Bill Glauber in our Milwaukee studio. So we have a lot of things to discuss today. We'll talk to Craig about the first presidential debate Monday night. He'll handicap it for us. Then we'll talk to Tom Kircher, who will be fact-checking the presidential candidates. We'll look at the new Marquette University Law School poll. And we'll talk about Sheriff David Clarke's very lucrative road show that he's been on lately. And we remember Terry Kohler, one of the Republican Party's biggest backers in Wisconsin. We'll have your winners and losers and your questions. But first, let's go to Craig Gilbert in Washington to talk about Monday night's presidential debate. So, Craig, the first of three debates is Monday night, and the stakes are really high for both candidates. Why don't we start with Hillary Clinton? What does Clinton need to do in this first debate?
Well, I think in some ways the answer has as much to do with Trump as it does with Clinton. I think a lot of the suspense is whether we're going to get kind of an unplugged, blustery Donald Trump we're used to seeing, or an effort at a more presidential Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton has something to do with that. I mean, Donald Trump's very reactive, and I think if she's worried about Donald Trump looking too presentable and too presidential, she can try to press his button. And usually when that happens, he reacts.
Right. He certainly did during the debates during the primary. So what about Trump? Does Trump get points just by being on the same stage with Clinton?
Well, some people think that he benefits and he will benefit from everybody's expectations being lower for him when it comes to his sort of temperament and demeanor. I mean, a lot of voters are going to be tuning in for the first time. There's a lot of undecided voters out there. You see in a place like Wisconsin, even though the race, Hillary Clinton has sort of had a persistent lead in this race, and we saw it again in the latest Wisconsin poll, there's an unusual number of undecideds. There's a lot of people interested in the third-party candidates, depending on how you ask the question. I mean, there's like 20 to 30% of the electorate that's withholding its support from the two major party candidates. So that tells you how potentially volatile the race can be, and it really does kind of raise the stakes on Monday.
Yeah. So how are the candidates preparing? Trump has said in the past, I think you told Hugh Hewitt back in June, that I don't really need to prepare. I'm not going to use a stand-in for Hillary Clinton. Clinton tends to over-prepare, in the opinion of some people. So what are you hearing about how their preparations are going?
Well, it is funny. I mean, someone told me during the first Republican debate in Cleveland a year ago, when they walked by Trump's preparation room, he was in this big room all by himself watching TV, which kind of tells you a lot about how he approaches these things. Obviously not in a traditional way. I think that does cause Republicans some concern that he's not going to be as grounded in the issues as he should be, and could make a mistake as a result, but that's kind of like who he is, and that's what he's comfortable with. I think Hillary Clinton is trying to prepare for a couple of different scenarios with respect to Trump, depending on, again, which Trump we get and she gets next week.
Yeah, which Trump shows up. Now, Trump is quite a showman, obviously, having done a lot of TV. Clinton tends to be a more conventional debater. How does she deal with that aspect of approaching Trump for the first time side by side?
She's a very practiced debater. She's debated certainly more than he is. I mean, he went through a lot of debates in this cycle, but if you go back to 2008, she held her own in her debates and up against Barack Obama in debate after debate. Some of those debates were very, very contentious, obviously a completely different kind of candidate than Donald Trump. But, there is the potential in any debate for missteps, and I think that's also a concern on her side.
Yeah. And so how much do the debates really matter? In the past, have the debates turned elections?
Well, it's hard to find an example where a debate in recent history completely transformed an election and sort of flipped it. But you do have some interesting cases. In 2000, in a very close race between Al Gore and George W. Bush, Gore was sort of seen as, stumbling in the debates in terms of his mannerisms and the way he carried himself on stage. That was a race in which it didn't take much to move the numbers. It was so close. You had a situation 4 years ago where the first debate between Mitt Romney and Barack Obama narrowed the gap considerably between those two. It didn't change the outcome of the race because the gains that Mitt Romney made after that first debate dissipated later. But it did tell you that a debate can have an impact. And again, looking at a state like Wisconsin where Donald Trump has been closed the gap, but still been persistently and chronically behind, the debate is kind of an opportunity for him to try to shake up that dynamic and put a state into play that Republicans have really not been very confident of carrying.
Yeah. So finally, one last question. There's another person at the debate, the moderator, in this case Lester Holt from NBC News. The moderators have been criticized by both sides during this cycle. What does the moderator have to do in these debates?
So people are, expecting the moderator to kind of strike a perfect balance between kind of not becoming the center of attention and not taking over, but also challenging the candidates, fact-checking the candidates, not throwing them softballs and not letting them get away with falsehoods and evasions. I mean, that's a lot to ask. And so you can expect all these moderators to be criticized, I think, on both sides, criticized for being too passive and criticized for being for intervening too much and not letting the candidates go at it.
Yeah. Craig Gilbert, thanks so much.
Talk to you next time.
And now we're going to go to Tom Kircher of PolitiFact Wisconsin, who is fact-checking the presidential candidates. So, Tom, PolitiFact Wisconsin has done a number of ratings on the presidential candidates or involving the presidential candidates,
right.
And you're collecting a few of those for an article that is going to run online and in print on Monday morning. But you're going to give us a preview here,
right.
So let's go through a couple of them. One is that Clinton says she would bring 186,740 new jobs to Wisconsin, and Trump would cost Wisconsin 61,050 jobs. We rated that half true. Why?
Those are awfully specific numbers, right? On the one hand, she was citing a solid estimate made by Moody's Analytics. Moody's took a look at both Trump and Clinton policies and came up with those job estimates. On the other hand, there are other estimates showing very different results. The Tax Foundation, for example, said Trump would gain more jobs than Clinton.
So let's move on to another one. This one is U.S. Rep. Sean Duffy from northern Wisconsin. He has claimed that Hillary Clinton's aide, Huma Abedin, has ties to the Muslim Brotherhood, and our rating for that is false. Why is that?
Yeah, one of the significant things about this is that there are some Republican lawmakers, including Ted Cruz during the campaign, who have said the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist group. They're not labeled as a terrorist group by the U.S., but that's part of the backdrop here. What we found is that there have been different articles trying to link Huma Abedin to that group, but Sean Duffy couldn't cite any evidence to back that up, and we couldn't find any either.
Okay, so no evidence to support that claim. Number three, Trump says Clinton is, quote, proposing to print instant work permits for millions of illegal immigrants to come in and take everybody's jobs, including low-income African Americans, end quote. And our rating for that, again, was false.
False because what Clinton proposed does not relate in this case to illegal immigrants. What she's proposing is that students from abroad who are already here legally in the U.S. would be allowed to stay permanently to take jobs. And again, those are people in getting advanced degrees, advanced skills, so the likelihood of them taking the jobs of low-income people is pretty small.
Okay, so an important distinction there. And finally, Tammy Baldwin, U.S. Senator, says Trump, quote, has a long history of exporting jobs overseas, and our rating is half true.
Yeah, there are a number of Trump label products, like some of his clothing lines, that are in fact made overseas. But those are jobs that were created initially overseas, not jobs that were in the U.S. and then moved.
All right. Tom Kircher, thanks so much. Again, Tom's article will be at JS Online and in the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel on Monday morning. And now I'm back with Bill Glauber of the Journal Sentinel staff and Dan Bice, a columnist for the Journal Sentinel. We're going to talk about the Marquette University Law School poll that just came out on Wednesday. And
these things come out like every other week now, don't they?
They do, and you can expect that to keep happening until November 8th. Bill, the presidential race is about where it was before. Any surprises there?
No, I don't think so. Voters don't like much of the candidates. Even those who kind of like the candidates aren't so thrilled with them. Clinton, who's led the whole way, is now up 2 among likely voters, which is now more important than the registered voters. We have reached that stage of the campaign.
So that's the margin of error,
yeah,
right?
And that's within the margin of error, and then up 5 among all registered voters. So it's a close race, but, you know, it kind of hasn't moved much, you know. Once it finally settled down, this is where it is.
Are either of you surprised that there's still 12% of is that likely or register? I'm not sure which, but 12% in any case that are undecided at this point?
No.
What else do you need to know about these candidates?
Again, it's not that you don't know enough about them. It's trying to live with yourself after you've decided which one to support. So I think that's the issue. But you know, we've talked about frequently on this show. There's 2 ways to look at campaigns. One's to look at the poll numbers, and then the second is to look at the campaigns. So even though this poll shows that it's 2 points difference, we're still not seeing a lot of money pouring into the state, or we're not seeing many of the candidates come into the state. Donald Trump Jr. is coming here. So the campaigns aren't acting like this is Ohio or or Pennsylvania or one of the other swing states yet.
Yeah, most of 538, Fox, and others have Wisconsin leaning blue for sure at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, somebody described it, you know, it's like the Lucy and the football and Charlie Brown, and with the Republicans, every time they think they're going to kick it, it gets moved away. I mean, it's been a long time since Republicans have won here, 1984 with Ronald Reagan, so they're not throwing a ton of resources in here yet. They do have a get-out-the-vote operation, which they think will push numbers for them, but still without the candidate and or big-time advertising, you have to wonder.
Well, let's move to the Senate race. What did you see in the poll here?
The Senate race, Feingold is up 6. He has led against Johnson. He has led the whole way through in these polling numbers. It's too early to say that the numbers are getting baked in, but let's say that they're starting to mix the ingredients. I mean, you know, you kind of have to wonder when Johnson is going to have a breakthrough and start really cutting into Feingold.
He's going to need something significant. I mean, the numbers. I mean, he did close in a little bit in the August polling, but in this poll, Feingold still looks to be fairly strong. His favorables, what are his favorables?
He's plus 16 on favorables, I believe, 45% favorable, 29% unfavorable, which is remarkable in this day and age where nobody likes anybody.
And where's Johnson at?
Johnson is sort of a little bit underwater, and about 30% don't even know who he is.
So, but actually in this poll, there were 2 other people who had strong favorables. President Obama is at 54%, and though it's a little bit down, Paul Ryan's still at 47, 48%. So there are some politicians in Wisconsin that people here like.
And Obama has had high favorables in Wisconsin throughout. Even when they dipped below 50 into the 40s, they were still higher than national. So he's always been, you know, you might not know it, but he has always retained pretty high favorability here in Wisconsin, and he just keeps going up right now.
Actually, I think that's true with both Paul Ryan, and Obama
yes.
here. They occasionally will have these little blips that I don't think are really dips. They're just occasional drops where they almost always come back.
Dan, you brought up the National Republican Party maybe not paying as much attention to Wisconsin. It appears to be leaning blue for the presidential. How's that affecting, or both of you can respond to this, how's that affecting the Senate race? Well,
the Senate race, again, is not getting much attention nationally. A lot of people are thinking that even though it's not a huge margin that Feingold has, there's not been any poll that shows that Johnson is closing in. So I think until he shows some proof that he's closing the gap, that the national groups won't come in and put money here.
The big races right now seem to be in New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina. Those are getting a lot of action, a lot of outside groups. This had the outside group, still does, but it's a little bit off the table right now. Not that it can't change. Wouldn't want to say that it can't change. It can. There's 2 debates. There's going to be more ad spending. But you're starting to wonder how does Johnson turn this thing around?
Mm-hmm.
And it really is the case of Johnson having to turn it around from the polling.
A couple of notes on other people in the poll. One, I haven't really paid too much attention to what Senator Tammy Baldwin's numbers
Apparently neither has anybody else, right?
Well, it's interesting that, both Johnson and Tammy Baldwin, 30% of Wisconsin voters say they have no opinion on them, which is pretty incredible that we have two incumbent senators that nearly a third of the voters here say they have no opinion on either one. She's at 38% favorable, which isn't terrible. It's not great either. It means that I think Republicans look at that, particularly in a non-presidential year, and say this is a winnable race against Tammy Baldwin. Tammy Baldwin probably looks at it and says this is probably a winnable race for them. So look for her to become much more active and try to do things to raise her visibility here. The other one is Scott Walker, who's at 43%. He's recovered a little bit since his presidential run, but still, there was the other poll this month showing that he's the 10th least popular governor in America, which, a year ago he was, I think, at 1 or 2, so he's made progress there.
Right. That's going to be tough to run on.
Wow.
Damning with fake praise. But
let's move to another politician who has been in the news lately. Dan, you wrote about him.
One of my favorite politicians.
Earlier this week. One of mine, too, Sheriff David Clarke.
Right.
And why don't you tell us what you found and what the reaction's been?
Well, a lot of people contact me almost every day asking, where is Sheriff Clarke and why isn't he involved in things here? And so I decided to look at his ethics reports to see what his outside income was, what he reports as income he's gotten from other sources besides his job as sheriff. And he makes $132,000 a year as sheriff. And he brought in $150,000 in gifts, speaking fees, and travel expenses in 2015. So 2015, that's just when he's becoming a national figure. You could bet that the figure this year is going to be much more significant.
Okay, how much does he make as sheriff? I should know this.
132. And he brought in right around 150 in outside income. Yeah. And what's interesting are some of the details. There was a trip that he took to Israel and Russia late last year. The total cost of that trip, $40,000. And it was funded largely by the NRA, a board member of the NRA, and the Russian pro-gun outfit.
Who knew?
He did, apparently, because they paid about $10,000 of his trip. And then he made about $26,000 on speaking fees, money that he can keep, directly for himself. But he also likes to travel, and he likes to travel very well. And he had about 25 trips, round trips that he took, and the cost for those came out to be right around $50,000 that other groups paid for, including one flight that was $9,000 to go speak at an event in Idaho. So I'm guessing that's...
Wait a minute, an event in Idaho with basically the biggest media movers and shakers and biggest moguls in the country.
Yeah,
that's not just an event.
Yeah,
that's a big
it's
event.
called the Allen and Company Summit. Not many people know about it, but in fact, the deal for Jeff Bezos to buy the Washington Post was nailed down there. So this is a major event, but still, it looks like he took someone's private jet out there to go to that event. And clearly, he didn't like the story. I'm being swamped with Twitter tweets from
I was going to ask you about the reaction.
Hundreds and thousands of people who weren't fond of it. But I hear from a lot of people here locally. My personal email was, I don't know, it'd be about 60-40 in terms of people who were upset with Sheriff Clarke about this outside income, and 40% who were defending him, saying that he should be able to do whatever he wants.
So, if those who are upset, what are they upset about?
The fact, first of all, that the county rules say that you're not supposed to use your public office for private gain. Is this using your public office for private gain? No one's really looked into that. And I don't think we've ever had a county elected official who's had this visibility and had this outside income. So it's probably something that the County Ethics Board will have to look at.
Yeah. Let's move to briefly to the death of Terry Kohler. and maybe both of you could talk about this, quite a prominent figure in the Republican Party in this state.
He's not somebody that a lot of people in the general public know, but he's someone that any Republican in the state and a lot of national figures, including Newt Gingrich, know very, very well. You talked to his daughter?
I spoke to his daughter, and he was obviously beloved in the family, and she talked about his love for sailing. I mean, this guy was a larger-than-life figure, adventurer. Regardless of what you think about him politically, he had a lot of interest.
He's sometimes a very funny guy. In 1982, when he runs against Tony Earl and he loses, what's the button he wore?
I can't remember, but he wore an anti-Earl button at the concessions.
And then he went on a sailing trip and basically said, "I'm no good as a candidate anymore." But then he runs in '86 to be a county surveyor, and
to get rid of the office, and he loses.
So he was much better at finding winning candidates than being a winning candidate. Because since then, he's given to a number of groups. He's led in terms of funding the anti-union activities, helped found Wisconsin Club for Growth, and was very active in terms of supporting $5 million to marriage programs and so forth. So he's been very active in terms of giving, not so successful at running.
Right, and a great Wisconsin family too, right? I mean, the father and grandfather were both governors.
Right. His father was a 3-term governor, and his grandfather was a 1-term governor, both of them Republicans. So the Republicans in the blood in the Kohler family.
All right. Well, let's move now to our winners and losers. Bill, I'm going to go to you first.
Ann Basting, who won the MacArthur Foundation
As your winner.
Grant as a winner. And, Ann does great work with older adults with cognitive issues and using storytelling to help them sort of associate with other people and to sort of bring them out. And she's been doing this work for years, and it's good to see her recognized.
Yeah, great
nationally.
credit to her work.
Yes.
And who's your loser?
Well, the loser is the Department of Transportation. They tried to bury in their budget documents a proposal that would make that photo ID that people can get for free. It would turn it into a for voting only ID. They claim it's a money-saving measure. Apparently, they're spending about $1 million a year on these free photo IDs for those who need them for voting.
They're hoping people buy actual IDs.
Buy actual IDs. But it does show you the need for identification in daily life. That apparently a lot of people do not have official IDs, and if you don't drive, where are you going to get that official ID?
This is a case of the devil being in the details.
Literally, Patrick Marley was the one who found it of our staff. It was buried in about a 300-page budget document, and Patrick ferreted it out. It's causing a kerfuffle. We'll see how it goes.
All right. Kudos to Patrick for good reporting. Dan, you're a loser.
We're going to stick with transportation and the state. Right now, the governor has he's saying he's not going to raise the gas tax, but that means not much road construction. The Republicans in the Assembly want road construction, but they don't want to say how they pay for it. And this week, the governor basically put the ball in Assembly Speaker Robin Vos's court and said, tell us how you're going to pay for it. But essentially, it's a concession that right now there is no plan. The Republicans control the legislature, the governor's office, and the Supreme Court, but we have no idea what's going to go on with road construction in the next 2 years.
And who's your winner?
My winner's Russ Feingold. The one detail that popped out in the Marquette poll was his favorability being up 16 points. As you said, it was 45-29, which is pretty incredible for a politician at this point. And in fact, if I remember correctly, someone wrote in the Journal Sentinel a couple months ago.
You're going to really hold me to account.
that at this point, both candidates would be underwater, but it turns out that that's not the case. So both you had written that Johnson and Feingold would be having trouble at this time, but for some reason Feingold is doing much better this time than he did in 2010.
All right, Russ Feingold's your winner. So let's go to a couple of readers' questions. Dan, the first one is for you. It's about a piece that posted this morning about Hector Colon, who's up for reappointment at the county board. And our reader wants to know sort of who's behind this money. Is it a Republican or a Democrat? Why didn't you say?
Well, it's it's dark money. We don't know who's behind it. The group that's spending the money is called Milwaukee Works. They have been very supportive of Chris Abele before. Chris Abele has a strong interest in making sure his appointment his nominee gets confirmed. So
Chris Abele is one of the wealthiest people in Milwaukee.
And they did give me a statement that was not quite direct when I asked, was Chris Abele funding the group? What they said was he did not direct them to spend their money on these particular items, these mailers and other items. So
I think it's fair to say Abele's backed Democrats in the past.
He's backed not just Democrats, but he's backed dark money groups. He used a dark money group to try to fight and get David Clarke out of office. He was unsuccessful, but he dropped, about $200,000 through the Greater Wisconsin Committee. So the only reason we even know about that is that he finally acknowledged that he was the source of much of that money.
All right, Bill, one for you too. Does the Journal Sentinel believe that there are too many left-leaning panelists for the first presidential debate, and who's coming up with the questions for this debate?
Well, there is only one panelist, and that's Lester Holt of NBC, and I believe he's coming up with the questions. And, it says a lot about the time and era we live in that people want to point fingers at a moderator or point fingers at media perceptions on all of this and for the reason for this being a terrible campaign, when I think it might be staring us right in the face. The two candidates are not very popular, and both sides are going to spin like crazy after this debate. Lester Holt's in a really tough position.
Well, you can see
absolutely.
that based on the reaction to how Matt Lauer did. And the criticism he came under after his. But his was actually for being too soft on Trump and too hard on Clinton, right?
And then the other problem with that the moderator is going to, if there is an actual falsehood uttered, does the moderator call out the candidate? That's not true. I don't know what you do. I don't know what the people expect. I think maybe in this case, I think the candidates will be going at each other. Maybe it'll be a great debate and he'll just be a referee, which is, that's really what you want to see. The attention shouldn't be on the moderator. It should be on the candidates. They should have to prove to the American public which one is better to be president. Or in this case, maybe neither will prove it. But it's really, the onus is on them.
All right. Well, we'll be watching Monday night. That's it for On Politics for this Thursday. I'd like to thank our guests today, Dan Bice and Bill Glauber in the Milwaukee studio, Craig Gilbert in Washington, and Tom Kircher of PolitiFact Wisconsin. I'm David Haynes, the opinions editor at the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Catch us on Facebook Live and at JS Online. Thanks for watching.